Have you ever had a single message change the entire course of your life? For me, it arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was 29, standing in my tiny Austin kitchen, still holding a coffee mug, when my phone lit up. 12 words. Wedding's off. Expect a call from my lawyer. No explanation, no warmth, not even my name. Just 12 cold syllables from the man I believed I would marry. I remember the mug slipping, shattering across the floor, but the sound was nothing compared to the silence that followed. In that silence, the world tilted. The air felt heavier, like someone had pulled the oxygen out of the room. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that his fingers had slipped across the screen. But deep inside, something old and familiar stirred a warning I had ignored too many times before. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was erasure. My story, my future rewritten without my consent. At that moment, staring at a blank wall where our wedding photos should have one day hung, I understood this was not the end. It was the beginning. Looking back now, I realize there are moments when life doesn't ask politely. It storms in tears down the walls you thought were safe, and forces you to stand bare in the wreckage. That night, as I sank onto the kitchen tiles, I remembered every holiday where my sister took the spotlight, every polite smile from his mother that never reached her eyes, every warning I brushed aside. The text was only the spark. The fire had been building for years, and what came after would burn hotter than I ever imagined. At first, I did what many of us do when faced with sudden loss. I scrolled through old photos. His arm around me at the lake, our smiles staged, but convincing, the ring glinting under restaurant lights when he proposed. Every memory looked different now, as if someone had drawn a red line through them. Studies say heartbreak activates the same part of the brain as physical pain. That night, I believed it. My chest ached as if I'd been struck. And yet, even through the tears, a strange clarity began to form. Clarity is an odd companion to grief. It doesn't arrive loudly, it creeps in like dawn through a half-open curtain. As I sat surrounded by broken porcelain, I thought of the conversations I'd dismissed. His mother asking about my salary with a smile too tight, his sister trying on my dress just for fun, his sudden distance weeks before. I had called it nerves, tradition, family politics. But the truth had been staring at me all along. That night, I couldn't deny it anymore. I hadn't lost love. I had been carefully, deliberately replaced. Maybe you've been there too, betrayed not just by a partner, but by the people you trusted most. It feels like the ground crumbles beneath your feet, like the rules of family and loyalty no longer apply. But here's what I didn't know. Then being erased can also mean being rewritten. That text message, those 12 words, were meant to silence me. Instead, they became the first sentence of a new chapter. One I would write on my own terms, not as a victim, but as a voice. And this is where my story truly begins. From the very beginning, Margaret Whitmore, my would-be mother-in-law, was all smiles. She leaned across brunch tables, calling me dear, complimenting my earrings, telling neighbors I was practically family. But beneath her warmth lived something sharper. Her eyes measured like a jeweler inspecting a stone, and finding flaws invisible to everyone else. At first, I thought it was nerves. After all, she came from old Houston wealth, while I was a teacher raised by middle-class parents. But over time, I realized her smiles were less welcome and more warning, a silent reminder that I had not yet earned my place. It's a story I've since heard echoed by countless women. On forums and quiet coffee shop conversations, the pattern repeats: the mother-in-law who greets you sweetly, but slips in questions that feel like barbs. What does your family do? Are you sure teaching is a stable career? Sometimes it isn't even the words, but the timing delivered when no one else is listening, leaving you to wonder if you imagined the sting. In American culture, we often laugh about the difficult mother-in-law, but behind the joke lies real grief for many brides-to-be. I remember one night in particular. We were finalizing guest lists, when Margaret leaned in, her voice honeyed, but her message cutting. Of course we'll cover expenses for our side. But are you comfortable handling yours? Weddings can be a strain. Her smile didn't falter, but my chest tightened. I heard what she wasn't saying: you can't afford this life. Later, when I shared the story online, strangers nodded knowingly. Some told me how their partners' mothers questioned their education or hinted they weren't good enough stock. I realized then I wasn't alone, and that brought both comfort and sadness. The lesson one I wish I'd learned sooner is that words wrapped in politeness can still wound deeply. Many of us are taught to brush off subtle digs to keep the peace, but ignoring them often invites more. If I had named the behavior earlier, maybe I could have drawn firmer boundaries, or at least recognized what was happening to me. Respect in a relationship is not only between two people, it extends to how their families treat one another. A smile without respect is just a mask, and a mask eventually slips. Looking back, Margaret's behavior wasn't random. It was preparation. Each polite jab, each carefully placed doubt was laying the foundation for the storm that followed. She wasn't just testing me, she was training the family to see me as less. And as painful as that realization was, it opened my eyes to the truth. What seemed like small wounds were actually rehearsals for betrayal. The story of Margaret's smile is not just mine. It's a warning. Because behind every mask lies a choice to ignore the cracks, or to finally see them. And that choice would soon face me again this time, with someone even closer, my own sister. Chloe wasn't just my sister, she was the star of every family gathering. She arrived late, heels clicking, eyes sparkling, and somehow the entire room bent toward her like flowers chasing the sun. My parents would beam as she recounted her adventures, her outfits drawing compliments, her stories drawing laughter. Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, making sure the meal was warm and the glasses were full. If someone remembered, they might toss me a thank you, but it was fleeting, quickly swallowed by the glow around Chloe. From childhood onward, I learned what it meant to fade. Psychologists call it middle child syndrome, or the invisible sibling effect. And I see it echoed everywhere. Scroll through parenting forums, and you'll find story after story of children who felt overlooked while another sibling shone. In America, we love to celebrate the star athlete, the beauty queen, the child who excels outwardly, often at the quiet expense of the one who keeps everything running in the background. I didn't resent Chloe's shine, at least not at first. I admired her confidence, her ability to light up a room, but admiration eventually turned into ache. That ache deepened during the holidays. One Thanksgiving, Chloe swept in wearing a designer dress, and my mother clasped her hands as though royalty had arrived. I was already there cooking since dawn, carving the turkey, arranging the pies. Yet when compliments were given, they floated Chloe's way. She looks radiant. She has such style. I smiled, nodding, reminding myself that love isn't measured by applause. But years of quiet labor without recognition can feel like being written in invisible ink, present, necessary, but unread. And invisible ink eventually fades unless someone chooses to reveal it. The lesson I've carried is this: silence doesn't equal peace, and invisibility doesn't equal harmony. Many of us, especially women, are taught that keeping the household running quietly is noble, even expected. But nobility without acknowledgement becomes a weight. If I could speak to my younger self, I'd tell her this: your worth isn't measured in the shadows you stand in. It's measured by the light you allow yourself to claim. And if no one else names your effort, you must be the first to speak it aloud. My relationship with Chloe carried this imbalance into adulthood. So when she appeared at my gown, fitting, slipping into my dress with a laugh, the consultant's applause hit me like déjà vu. Once again, Chloe was center stage, and I was half-zipped in the corner unseen. What seemed like playful sibling rivalry was in truth the continuation of a script written long ago. But unlike childhood, the stakes were higher now. Weddings are supposed to unite families, but mine was slowly dividing me from the inside. And as rehearsals for humiliation continued, the stage was being set for betrayal far deeper than I ever imagined. The signs of what was coming didn't arrive all at once. They showed up quietly like cracks in a foundation. At first it was small. At my gown fitting, Chloe slipped into the very dress I had chosen, spinning under the lights as the consultant clapped. "You look like the bride already," she said, her laughter echoing in the room. I stood half-zipped, my reflection dimmer by comparison, wondering if anyone else saw the cruelty. It looked playful on the surface, but inside, I felt like a guest in my own story, my joy shrinking inch by inch. The engagement party should have been different, a celebration of love and future promises. Yet I remember being pulled aside by Margaret, champagne glass in hand. Her voice velvet, but her words sharp. "Ethan could have chosen better," she whispered. She smiled when others passed by, but I heard the knife hidden in her tone. Sociologists call this covert aggression attacks, wrapped in politeness designed to leave you questioning your own reaction. And it worked. I laughed it off, told myself it was nerves, but that night I went home feeling smaller than I had ever been. Then came the rehearsal dinner, the final gathering before the vows. I expected to sit beside Ethan to share glances that spoke of everything we had planned. Instead, my name card was at the far end of the table by the kitchen doors, where servers rushed past with trays. I raised a glass, but no one toasted back. I smiled, but laughter drowned me out. It felt deliberate, like a dress rehearsal, not for the wedding, but for my erasure. Later, I'd learned that's exactly what it was, a test to see how much humiliation I would quietly accept. When I think of those moments now, I understand something I didn't then. We often dismiss patterns of disrespect as coincidence. It's just one dinner, it's only a joke. But small humiliations repeated often enough prepare the ground for larger betrayals. It's like a drip of water on stone, gentle at first, but eventually it carves a canyon. The mistake many of us make is waiting for something big enough to take seriously, instead of recognizing the accumulation of tiny cuts that bleed us dry. By the time the big betrayal arrives, we're already too weak to stand tall. Looking back, those events weren't random missteps. They were carefully staged. Each dress fitting, each whisper, each misplaced name card was a rehearsal for what would come. They taught the family how to minimize me, and they taught me how to stay silent. But silence is not strength. It is surrender. I wish I had spoken up then, but I didn't. And that silence opened the door to the midnight phone call that would change everything. Because soon after the rehearsal dinner, Ethan's voice would tremble through the line, carrying truths that would break my heart and force me to finally face the choice between being erased or rising. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Ethan's name, and for a long moment I just stared at it, torn between hope and dread. When I finally answered, his voice was low, almost broken. He didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was. He simply whispered, "I'm sorry." For half an hour, words poured out of him like water from a dam. Each sentence confirmed what my heart had already suspected: he still loved me, but he had chosen comfort, inheritance, and his family's approval over me. His love wasn't strong enough to stand. Listening to him, I felt both vindicated and devastated. Vindicated because I finally knew I wasn't imagining the distance, the whispers, the sudden coldness. But devastated because knowing the truth didn't make the pain any less. Ethan explained how Margaret threatened to cut him off financially, how she said marrying me would ruin the family's reputation. And Chloe, my sister, had been the one feeding her details about my doubts and insecurities. Betrayal layered on betrayal until I could hardly breathe. His words weren't a comfort. They were confirmation that I had been outnumbered all along. Stories like mine aren't rare. In America, wealth and family legacy often hold a power that love struggles to match. How many times have we heard of relationships collapsing under the weight of money? Studies show financial conflict is one of the top predictors of divorce. And here I was facing the truth before the marriage even began. Ethan chose the path many do: security over courage, silence over truth. It's easier to stay in the house you inherit than to build one with your own hands. But easier rarely means better, and he would learn that too late. The lesson I carry from that night is simple, but sharp: love that cannot stand up to pressure is not love at all. Real love is tested, not when it's convenient, but when it's costly. Ethan's choice revealed something important, not just about him, but about me. I had been holding on to an illusion, believing that affection could outweigh fear, that passion could survive without protection. But love without bravery is just comfort. And comfort can disappear in a moment, leaving only regret. That night, through tears and silence, I began to see that my worth was not negotiable. When the call ended, I didn't cry right away. Instead, I sat in the dark, phone still in my hand, clarity slowly seeping in. I realized the last 2 years had been written like a script by someone else, Margaret directing, Chloe assisting, Ethan obeying. And I had been cast as the disposable character, the one meant to disappear before the final act. But erasure leaves evidence, and evidence can become power. Soon I would gather every trace, every whisper, every receipt. Because if Ethan chose wealth over love, then I would choose something stronger, truth. And truth would lead me into battle. In the weeks after Ethan's call, silence became my companion. But beneath that silence, something stronger stirred. I began collecting scraps of evidence, emails Chloe had forwarded, contracts Margaret had adjusted, even notes I jotted after overhearing hushed conversations. At first it felt paranoid, like I was building a puzzle no one else believed existed. But the more I gathered, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't simply a wedding gone wrong. It was a calculated erasure. And once I saw that truth, I couldn't unsee it. Victimhood was no longer my only role. I had to become a fighter. One night, digging through old messages, I found Chloe's email to Margaret attaching my vendor contracts. My heart pounded as I stared at her words, so casual yet so cruel. "Thought you'd want these," she wrote, as if handing over pieces of my life was nothing more than a chore. Realizing my sister had betrayed me in writing was both devastating and liberating. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining the manipulation, that my pain had roots in reality. Sometimes the things we fear most are confirmed not with screams, but with sentences typed on glowing screens. I wasn't alone in this kind of battle. Across America, stories surface of women forced to fight not just for love, but for dignity, standing up to in-laws who prize siblings who sabotage, and families who measure worth in wealth instead of character. Courts are filled with cases of privacy breaches, financial manipulation, and betrayals hidden beneath polite smiles. Reading these stories gave me perspective. My struggle wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a larger pattern. Knowing that made me braver, reminding me that what feels personal can also be systemic, and therefore it can be challenged. The lesson I learned during those long nights of note-taking was this: evidence is power. Emotions matter, but they can be dismissed as overreactions. Proof cannot. Gathering receipts, keeping records, documenting every slight, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. Too often women are told to let it go, to avoid making waves. But letting go without recognition doesn't heal, it erases. And I refuse to be erased any longer. Each file, each screenshot, each witness became a piece of armor, preparing me for the day I would finally confront the people who had tried to silence me. The turning point came when James, Ethan's older brother, approached me outside the courthouse where he worked. His eyes were tired, his tie undone, but his words were steady. He admitted Margaret had given him my medical file months before, urging him to convince Ethan I was unstable. Hearing it spoken aloud was both horrifying and affirming. For the first time, someone from their side acknowledged the truth. And in that moment, I knew my case wasn't just personal, it was winnable. Because once lies are exposed, they lose their power. And soon I would take those lies into the courtroom. The courthouse smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. As I stepped inside, file folder pressed tightly against my chest, I felt both terrified and strangely calm. This wasn't the wedding aisle I once dreamed of walking, but it was a path just as defining. Across the room, Margaret arrived in her tailored suit, chin lifted like a queen entering her court. Chloe trailed behind, her smile brittle, rehearsed. They expected to intimidate me with their presence. What they didn't know was that intimidation had lost its power. I wasn't the girl shrinking at family dinners anymore, I was the plaintiff. Piece by piece, my attorney laid out the story. Emails glowed on a courtroom screen, Chloe's words betraying her loyalty. Bank statements showed deposits in her name that matched my own withdrawals. And then came the medical file, passed between hands like contraband, the proof of a privacy violated. I watched the judge's eyes narrow as each page landed. It was as if my pain, once dismissed as paranoia, had finally taken on undeniable shape. The gallery behind us murmured, some shaking their heads. For once, I wasn't the only one seeing the truth. The masks were slipping. When Margaret took the stand, she spoke with the polish of a woman accustomed to obedience. Her tone was calm, her sentences deliberate. But under cross-examination, cracks appeared. Yes, she had shared my medical records. Yes, she had drafted a prenuptial agreement without my knowledge. No, she didn't see it as wrong. I was protecting my son, she said firmly. The words hung heavy in the air, exposing the truth, control disguised as care. Across the room, I saw Chloe shift uneasily, her eyes darting down. For the first time, doubt flickered in her expression, fragile and unguarded. Then Chloe herself was called. She tried to smile, but her voice wavered. Each email projected on the screen stripped her excuses away. I didn't know she stammered, but the evidence spoke louder. The consultant's applause at my gown, fitting the forwarded contracts, the quiet whispers, all of it now played out under oath. The room wasn't laughing with her anymore. It was judging her. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in months: dignity. Not because I had won yet, but because the truth had finally found its voice, unshakable and undeniable. The lesson I carried from that day is that silence protects the guilty, but truth frees the betrayed. Courtrooms are intimidating, filled with jargon and procedure, but they also offer something rare: clarity. Proof becomes louder than manipulation, facts, stronger than performance. For anyone who has ever been erased, bringing the truth into the light is a kind of resurrection. And when the verdict was read awarding damages for emotional distress and privacy violations, the victory wasn't the money, it was the acknowledgement that what was done to me was wrong. That recognition healed more than silence ever could. Outside, reporters waited on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Questions buzzed in the air, but I didn't give a speech. I simply walked forward, head high, the sun warming my face. The battle had been fought, and for once I had not been erased, I had been seen. Yet even as the crowd faded behind me, I knew my story wasn't over. Because survival isn't just about winning in court. It's about what comes after, when the ashes of betrayal still linger. And soon I would face the quiet work of rising again, piece by piece, into someone new. Back in my apartment, the trial behind me, I pulled out a shoebox I had hidden for months. Inside were fragments of what had once been my dream. A copy of the seating chart swatches from my wedding dress, canceled invitations. For a long time, these scraps felt like evidence of my failure. That night, I fed them one by one into the fireplace. Flames curled the paper into nothing, and with each flicker, I felt lighter. This wasn't erasure anymore, it was renewal. What once symbolized loss now became fuel for my rebirth. Looking back, I see the path clearly, the late-night texts that shattered me, the smiles from Margaret that cut sharper than knives, the years of living in Chloe's shadow, the rehearsals of humiliation at parties and dinners, Ethan's whispered confession that wealth mattered more than love, and finally the courtroom where truth replaced silence. Each step was painful, but together they formed the story of how I moved from victim to fighter and from fighter to survivor. Pain didn't vanish, but it transformed into power. And that transformation is something anyone can claim. Because here's the truth. Betrayal doesn't have the final word. Whether it's from family, friends, or the person you thought would never hurt you. Betrayal can break your heart, but it doesn't have to break your spirit. I've seen too many women suffer in silence, believing they're alone. But silence only protects the guilty. Sharing our stories, no matter how messy or imperfect, is how we reclaim our voices. It's how we turn shame into strength and grief into connection. If you've ever been erased, know this: you are not what they say. You are what you rise from. So if my story spoke to you, if you felt the sting of being unseen or the ache of being replaced, I want to hear yours. Share it in the comments because your voice matters and someone else may need to hear it. And if you believe in stories that remind us of our worth, hit like, subscribe, and stay. This community is for anyone who refuses to be silenced. Together we prove that strength isn't hiding, it's speaking, standing, rising. My name is Emily Carter, and I am not the woman they tried to erase. I am the woman they could never control.